You and I want to eat good, clean food in a financially responsible manner. Let's start with the big picture and then go through exactly what that means together. The big picture is one where the major markets of the future lie plus or minus 30 degrees around the equator. We currently have nearly 8 billion people on the planet. We are adding a further 4 billion people to make 12. And the way we're doing it is not by having more children, but by stretching out our lifetimes. By the year 2030, the GDP per capita is going to be around $14,000, and that's a lot of money, but it will be very unevenly distributed. The increase in the workforce is going to be further strengthened by female empowerment. That's happening worldwide. And as this population of ours grows, we will see hunger again on our planet. That's foreseeable according to the United Nations. There are some things we can do to make this better, and we're probably not going to make it altogether good. We will have some bumpy times ahead. That's probably coming. At the moment, we are in the hottest time period for our planet since the last ice age. The temperature rise is expected to be plus 3 degrees centigrade by the year 2100. I actually don't see how it can be that low, but let's hope the United Nations is right. I'll be gone by then. And why do I think there's a big risk? Well, the core of my problems sits with looking at an apple. If you look at the thickness of an apple skin relative to its diameter, an apple skin is only roughly 1% of the apple's diameter. Our atmosphere is only about 0.1% of our Earth's diameter. So the apple skin, relatively speaking, is much thicker. It's therefore within our power to ruin it. And it's also within our power to fix it. And I'm not sure what we're going to do. But there are some things we can do. We have reason to believe that the United Nations numbers of increasing beef consumption will continue. And that's because the behaviors in increasingly rich countries typically copy the behaviors that the currently rich countries have already shown. We're currently eating 12 crops and 5 animal species, which is a very, very narrow DNA footprint on which to gamble. We're taking a risk. We're taking a risk by eating very few different things. Our diversity in our food chain is very low. The vast majority is literally from 12 crops and 5 animal species. It's not much. There are a couple of countries that claim to be super good, but the major markets will dominate. So a couple of fringe countries, I'm sorry, that's not going to do it. Now, worldwide, we have an advantage when we look at global warming relative to artificial intelligence, because with global warming, we've come to a point now, it's taken a long time, we've come to a point now where there's a shared understanding worldwide that this is a problem. So that's good. With artificial intelligence, there's not a shared understanding that there are risks with artificial intelligence. So I think the regulation of artificial intelligence is much more difficult than the regulation of global warming. The bad news is that we're not doing enough, not nearly. But we are doing some things. And global warming is one area where the United Nations and the different organs of the United Nations are actually doing a good job. This is going to take money. So looking at the sustainable finance, part of what the United Nations is orchestrating via the IMF and other organizations is interesting. Now, fundamentally, the mechanism by which money is being provided out is quite simple. You take local banks who put together a consortium of various companies who lend money to businesses that can make the world more green and more sustainable. The big international organizations take part in that debt, and in a hierarchy, they take the highest financial risk. So, for instance, a local bank might make a big loan, and the IMF might take the lowest ranking debt in that hierarchy, which means that if the company that's borrowing the money goes insolvent, then the bank gets its ball back and the IMF takes a haircut. So that's the fundamental structure. And there are two ways in which this money is primarily being provided today. Partly it's called something called sustainability-linked debt. Now, sustainability-linked debt means that there are some specific goals that the money is being lent against. One good example is a company called Ecoplaza in Holland in Europe. It's a small company. They have about 100 supermarkets. One of their main problems is waste. What they've done is borrow a large sum of money to expand their business. And that large sum of money is practically interest-free if they hit their KPIs. And their KPIs are to reduce waste. So year by year, they must reduce waste, the percentage of goods wasted in all of their operations. If they hit their KPIs, and that's good for everyone, then their loans remain practically interest-free. If they fail to hit KPI, then they have to pay a high interest during that year. It's a great deal. Really, really good example of good debt where the IMF is helping out. If Ecoplaza goes insolvent, then, as I said, the IMF takes a haircut and the bank gets its ball back. That's a good mechanism. There's another way of doing debt under this program, which is something called use of proceeds debt. And in that scenario, which is 10 times bigger, companies say that, hey, I am green by just the way I am. For instance, it might be a battery manufacturer or a solar farm company or some such company which claims that fundamentally everything they do is good for Mother Nature. And okay, against that, again, they can borrow money in different ways. And they can do that either on an environmental basis or a social basis, where, for instance, they might be improving female empowerment in a country where that's not very strong yet, or some other social aspect. So those are use of proceeds debts. Those are very good ways of raising money into a business which is fundamentally green. Additionally, each country can provide grants for businesses that they think will contribute to the sustainability of that country. That's a third mechanism which is very closely associated with everything I've just spoken about, but it's kind of different because it's a local decision in a different way. Altogether, if you run a sustainable business, these are key aspects that you consider when you when you do your business case for your business, because you can get a lot of very useful capital in order to make your business even more viable. These are good things. And as you can see, there are quite a few dollars at play here. The assets under management today are coming up closer to $50 trillion that can be used as the lowest ranking debt in these programs. So this is proper money. And I'm impressed. I'm really impressed by the OECD. I'm impressed by the United Nations Global Compact around these things. These are very, very good things. Where does this money go then? Well, I've mentioned environmental and I've mentioned social. And there is something called ESG, which means environmental, social, governance. The environmental and social aspects are the hooks by which companies can ask for money. You either claim that you're environmentally good or socially good, and you say, hey, I'd like to borrow $100 million, a proper number. This is real money. And in order for a bank to get involved and use these big mechanisms, they will look at the governance of the business, see the way that the business is structured so that the money doesn't simply get wasted. This is quite responsible. This is big money, and the whole setup is quite responsible. I'm impressed by the way that this is run right now, and I hope that this is going to be even stronger in the future. So where might this money go? Well, first of all, finance thinks big when it comes to ESG. Doing small projects is not going to move the needle. We are trying to save the planet. So this is proper money. And the problems are on multiple levels. So greenhouse gas emissions are a major problem that we need to look at. 26% of greenhouse gas emissions are currently from food production. I'm going to go more deeply into that later on, but that's not the only thing. And biodiversity or DNA diversity as a whole is an area where we're taking risks. And we should spend real money in order to mitigate that risk. We're gambling. We need to take this seriously. So let's dig into greenhouse gases for a moment to understand where those problems lie. Well, greenhouse gases come mainly in two flavors. Carbon dioxide is one, and methane is the other one. Those are the two dominant causes of greenhouse effects on our planet today, measured in radiative forcing. Carbon dioxide, well, the main bandit there is fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels within industry, within transport. I'm not going to go into fossil fuels during this call. I will leave that to a separate call with you later on. Let me go into methane for a moment and into food as a whole. So methane is something that mainly is generated by us humans when we have large carbohydrate chains that break down in an environment where there is not enough oxygen. And because there's not enough oxygen, it doesn't break down all the way into carbon dioxide and water. It stops at CH4, which of course has no oxygen, and that's released out. So these anaerobic or oxygen low environments where we have breakdowns, they're a big source of methane in the world. Other sources of methane are when we dig up fossil fuels or pump out fossil fuels and we lose methane into the atmosphere. That's another big source of methane on our planet. And there are, of course, many natural sources of methane as well, just normal breakdown of various things. But more than 3/4 of all the methane being released today is methane that we are responsible for. And the biggest bandit there is agriculture. Agriculture then breaks down into a few different things. Red meat is a major problem, partly because food is digested anaerobically and you get gases coming out from front and bottom, and that contains a lot of methane. And also the manure that animals generate typically decay in a manner where most of the breakdown is inside the manure, so therefore you get methane production inside the manure because there's not enough oxygen again. So those are dominant ways of methane generation in agriculture. And rice cultivation is another one, because rice is grown in water, you have breakdown underwater, not enough oxygen, so again you have an excess of methane happening. So how can we fix that? Well, local production of course reduces transport, that's nice, but local production is often related to small scale production, which typically becomes energy inefficient in itself. So it's not that simple. All in all, these things are difficult to solve. They're not easy to solve. In agriculture as a whole, we have land degradation as well because of over-farming in different ways. This is not easy. If it was easy, then someone would have solved it already. But it's great that we're having this call together so that we can think about these things, and there are things that we can do to make things better. So let's look at these sustainable food challenges one more time. Well, I'm sorry to say that all of us on this call are probably part of the problem because we throw away food. So rich country waste is really high when it comes to food. Rich countries waste about 30% of all the food that is delivered to our homes. Easy to fix, one would think. And that behavior is moving to newly becoming rich countries, simply copying the same behavior, or maybe not even copying, just behaving like that. So rich country waste is a problem now, and unless we change things, which we probably will not, rich country waste is going to be an increasing problem going forward. Another problem is diets. We eat too much fat, too much salt. There are many things that we do badly in our diets. Packaging is not smart. Many things that we do wrong in our diets. We can really improve our diets a lot. And when we make these changes on an industrial level, if you're on this call, then you're of course financially up to speed, which means that you fully recognize that the companies that will be part of making these changes, those companies need to be profitable, because if they are not, then they will not exist in the future. So all the parts of the value chain needs to be profitable in the future, which means in improving the value chains throughout the whole process and thinking through the whole process from an eco standpoint and asking ourselves whether we're making sense all the way through. These are big challenges, and there's a lot we can do. Let's go a little bit deeper. Well, one of the big things which is happening and has been happening systematically since the 1960s is the introduction of electronics and computers in order to make food production more efficient. And those improvements are now exponentially improving through the use of machine learning to optimize resource use and look at the whole chain, through the use of computer vision and machine vision to automatically monitor how things are working, and then the use of artificial intelligence to take all of that input and think it through and come up with better solutions for how to do these things. Together, machine learning, ML, computer vision, machine vision, and AI are causing and enabling big efficiency improvements, and that's a wonderful thing. And you can see it from simple things such as having numeric data so that we know what the efficiency is when we take 100 kilograms of feed and we try to make protein, How can we convert that? What percentage is converted into protein? That type of numeric data can guide us going forward. So all of these technologies are in use today in order to better guide us going forward. So yeah, big transformation caused by AI and the subsets of AI. That's nice. Those are good things. Sustainable diets. Well, I looked at the United Nations FAO's list of sustainable diet items and spent time thinking through the UN opinions about these things. And desirable and affordable are two things that came back time and time again. If the 8 to 12 billion people we are feeding do not see next generation food as being desirable, they won't buy it. And if they can't afford to buy it, they won't buy it. So there's a lot that needs to be considered when we think about sustainable diets. It's not simple. It can be done. Food is emotional and it is cultural. We're already making big improvements in our diets in shifting from red meats to chickens, from red meats to fish. We currently eat more fish than we eat beef. That's a really good improvement in terms of environmental footprint. That's good. We're also looking at the lab-grown meat, but that's difficult because the fetal bovine serums that are used for lab-grown meat are extracted in manners which are emotionally quite challenging. I mean, getting involved with cows that give birth is not that great fun if you're extracting serum at that point in time. So lab-grown meat has its challenges. It's not cheap enough at the moment. It has some promise because, of course, you can edit and you can play around and you can perhaps make better meats that already include fibers. Imagine a hamburger where it's only one chunk, where the meat and the bread is mixed into one. A bit weird, but that sort of thing will come. So I highlight that lab-grown meat is possible, and currently it's difficult to scale, and it has a number of emotional challenges linked to it. And you see the same when big guys invest heavily into insects and seaweeds. Insects and seaweeds can produce protein more efficiently than most other methods. But again, when we go from 8 billion to 12 billion people, we're again looking at emotional and cultural issues where it's not that easy to explain that, okay, we've always eaten meat, but you should be eating grasshoppers. It's a bit of a difficult thing to sell as an idea. So yeah, I'm impressed by Kleiner Perkins, Google, and Bill Gates investing heavily into these new foods. It's a big mountain that they're seeking to climb. They've succeeded with similar things before, so I hope that they succeed again. But this is not easy because of the emotional and the cultural things that do exist. I think more probably it's a question of doing switches. So we can improve, we can switch from a fuel-guzzling car to a less fuel-guzzling car. We can switch from lamb to cheese. There are many things, small switches that we can make in order to make things better. If we switch all the way down this table to potatoes and all of us eat potatoes and skip everything else, then, well, nutritionally, that's not too smart. And also, we have seen single crop failures many times in our history. I'm thinking about Ireland in 1850. 10% of the population died over a 10-year period, and 10% of the population moved to North America. I'm thinking about my home countries back in 1866, 1867. similar single crop failures coupled with bad weather. 10% of my people died, and 10% of my people moved to North America as a result. I'm thinking about Bengal in 1943. 3 million people dead, partly because of single crop failures and partly because of the incompetence of people like Lord Mountbatten. Ethiopia, 1983, 1.2 million people dead, and we are currently in the middle of another famine in Ethiopia right now. So these problems have not gone away. So single crop dependencies are not good, and we are gambling on very few crops. We spoke about that earlier. But stepwise improvements are possible. And we need to recognize that there are no easy solutions. If someone had an easy solution, then you and I would not be talking to each other right now. But we are talking to each other. So let's look at fish, because fish is one of the really good things where there are lots of opportunities to make improvements. Well, there's something called eutrophication, and I apologize for jumping you with a huge word called eutrophication. But although it's a monster of a word, it's a very real effect and very serious. The way it works is that what we're doing is we're trying to farm land and get as high a yield from land as possible. And in doing that, we are adding more and more nutrients to land in order to make things really grow as well as possible. A lot of those nutrients leach, and that's what it's called. A lot of those nutrients leach into water and out into the sea. And when they come into the sea, you have happy algae that go, whoa, I can grow. And those happy algae, they grow so much that they bloom on the surface of the water. Lovely green areas where the algae bloom, very happy algae. And they block sunlight in such a way that the seaweed underneath doesn't get enough sunlight, which means that the seaweed grows weak. And because the seaweed grows weak, the bacteria that naturally occur around those seaweed can eat the seaweed, because the seaweed is not strong enough to survive against the bacteria. As those bacteria do that, the oxygen starts to go down and the algae stop blooming and fall down. And as the algae stop blooming and fall down into the bottom, the bacteria eat the algae. The result is that the bacteria eat up all the oxygen. At the end of it, you also get lots of methane. Wonderful. And the fish die, because there's no oxygen. Then we get fresh water coming in, flushing out that water and recirculating it and bringing in fresh fish, and everyone is happy for a while, but we're still feeding the farmland with just as many nutrients as we did before. So the cycle continues, year after year. So farming fish right by the shore is difficult if the water is shallow. If the water is deep right by the shore, then yeah, you can do sea-based fish farms, but that's difficult because you have a big cage in the water or nets in the water, maybe 10 meters deep or 20 meters deep, and you put in fish feed, and maybe 50% of that fish feed goes through the nets and out without being eaten by the fish. Mother Nature is regulating everything by letting water stream around and move around, so that's good in itself, but it means that a lot of that feed goes where it should not go. High concentrations of fish in small places like that enable new illnesses to grow, and you get sea lice on the skin of the fish. To manage those things, we put in poisons and antibiotics in order to get rid of those problems. And those antibiotics then drop through and come into the bottom area underneath the sea cages. And we get resistant behaviors down there, outside the cages. So sea-based fish farms are difficult. I'm not saying they're impossible, but they are difficult. They definitely have their challenges. So right by the shore is a problem, out at sea is a problem. Okay, so what are we supposed to do with fish farming? Well, one thing we can do is take the full fish farm and put it on land and control everything. Now this becomes an artificial intelligence problem now, because out at sea, Mother Nature regulated the amount of sunlight, regulated the amount of salt, regulated fresh water coming in, oxygenation levels, took out the phosphates, took out the sulfides, regulated the whole thing, the nitrogens and everything else. If we take all of those things and put it inside a house, then okay, the basic formula is simple. We take water, oxygen and feed, we put those in, we control everything, and we get fish coming out. I get that. And then in order to reduce the water footprint, we recirculate the water. So we take water out from the tanks, filter everything, and put the water back in. Obviously you can't do that with 100% of the water, but you can do it with 99 or 99.5%, that's doable. So you can recirculate the water several times before you discard it. And with regards to waste management, you can remove sulfides, phosphorus during waste treatment, and the output ends up being something that you can spread out on a rice paddy or on a field, because the output contains the types of phosphorus and so forth that actually are good for growing things. So that's good. And this type of a system, well, it's a closed system, which means that you can control the feed conversion ratio in a much better manner. So the amount of lost feed can be much less than in sea-based fish farming. That's an improvement. You can put these farms close to the local market, close to big cities, which means that the air transport that is used for fresh fish today can be taken out. So much more carbon dioxide friendly in that sense. Some problems with energy consumption, of course, because you're running water pumps in the system. So yep, you need to think about that. But all in all, the carbon dioxide footprint of land-based is much lower than the carbon dioxide footprint of sea-based, and much lower than red meat production. Also, given that this is all controlled, you can avoid using antibiotics in the feed, which reduces the total antibiotic use really much. So a lot of good things can be done with this. This is not the only example of improvement steps. I can give you examples of other companies, such as companies that convert manure to new forms of carbon, sort of carbon capture programs. There are many types of companies today that are in this ESG space, environmental, social, and governance space. Companies that can do a lot of good. From a financial standpoint, most of these do things in a similar manner. So typically you're looking at 5% or 10% seed capital convertible notes that then convert at Series A and so forth. Those are typical mechanisms by which people get going. But they need money, they need real money, all in all. So if we're going to move the needle, then quite radical things need to be done. This is one example. From our perspective as traders, well, I've been around the world meeting many of you, and I can conclude that We eat everything as a whole. Traders as a species are omnivorous. I've seen people eat very many strange things, I must say. We need to ask ourselves, okay, what do we really want? There was a famous Frenchman who once said that show me what people eat and I will tell you what they are like. Well, I would actually turn that one upside down and say that the challenge now is to ask ourselves who we are. And based on who we are, we then make a decision about what food we want to eat. Where do we want to take our planet? And we need to make our purchase decisions in line with that decision about who we are. We can actually change the planet to a great extent with our own behaviors, starting with waste management. I'm not an angel. I'm sure that no one on this call is an angel. If we can all make some improvements, then I think that's a really, really good thing. So next time that you pop open your standard account or ECN account or cent account and you pick your products and you start to trade, maybe you talk to your dedicated account manager to work out what you want to do. Do that, if I may, in a healthy, local and sustainable manner. I think it makes sense for all of us to be more efficient in everything we do, more efficient in our choice of food, how it's delivered to us, more efficient in the way we think about our trading. I think Robert would be happy with every type of efficiency improvement that we can come up with, and there are many. So join us now and let's continue this journey together. There's a lot that we can do together, and there's a lot that is happening already. As I said before, I'm impressed by the efforts that are coming through ultimately the United Nations in terms of making improvements. We have to accept some good with the bad in this world. We need to get all the big industries with us because we need to move the needle. That 3-degree centigrade number is horrendously high. And like I said, I don't see how we can keep it that low unless we make some really big changes. So big challenges ahead of us, and I think we can meet them if we act together, but we all need to do it together. So thank you for taking the time.